The air over North Hollywood on the morning of the 28th of February, 1997, didn't smell like a typical California spring. It smelled of ozone, burnt rubber, and the metallic tang of cordite. High above the asphalt, the rhythmic thump-thump-thump of news helicopter rotors sliced through the atmosphere, a mechanical heartbeat for a city about to witness a nightmare. Below, the cameras were zoomed in tight on a Bank of America parking lot, broadcasting a scene so surreal that viewers at home thought they were watching a movie trailer. But there was no director to shout cut, and the blood spilling onto the pavement was terrifyingly real. This wasn't just a heist, it was a declaration of war. Two men, encased in black steel and Kevlar, were methodically dismantling the authority of the Los Angeles Police Department. They were outnumbered by a factor of 100 to 1. But in the grim mathematics of urban warfare, they held the only variable that mattered: overwhelming, military-grade firepower. This is the story of the North Hollywood shootout, an event that didn't just break the peace of a neighborhood, it shattered the fundamental philosophy of American policing forever. To understand the chaos of that morning, we have to look into the shadows of the men behind the masks. Larry Phillips Jr. didn't just stumble into a life of crime, he was born into it, a dark inheritance passed down through generations. His grandfather had been a train robber, a relic of the Old West's dying gasps. His father, perhaps even more morbidly inclined, had made a living robbing graves. Crime was the family business, and Larry was its most ambitious CEO. But Larry's path to infamy had a detour through the world of physical perfection. In 1984, after walking away from the structure of high school, Larry sought a different kind of power. He walked into Gold's Gym in Pasadena, a temple of iron and sweat, aiming to become a professional bodybuilder. He pushed his body to its limits, but the mirror told him a hard truth. He didn't have the elite genetics required for the top tier of the sport. He had the drive, but not the frame. Frustrated, he turned his focus from building his body to building a facade. He wanted to look like a titan of industry, a man of wealth and status. His first attempt at this lifestyle was pathetic. He was arrested trying to shoplift designer suits. After a stint in jail, Larry tried to go straight, or at least a version of it. He became a real estate agent, but the slow grind of honest commissions couldn't satisfy the hunger in his gut. He began running small-scale property scams, defrauding clients for quick infusions of cash. It was during this period, likely back at Gold's Gym, that he met the man who would become his shadow. Emil Mătăsăreanu was a man shaped by rejection. An immigrant from Romania who arrived in LA in 1976, Emil's life had been a struggle against his own biology. Born with a rare heart condition, he was barred from the physical activities most boys took for granted. By high school, he weighed 350 pounds. The cruelty of his peers was relentless, turning his inner world into a fortress of bitterness and repressed rage. In 1989, in a desperate bid to reclaim his life, Emil joined Gold's Gym. When Larry met Emil, he saw a project. Emil was technically savvy and shared Larry's burgeoning obsession with firearms. Larry provided the tactical direction. Emil provided the technical support and a desperate, loyal secondary muscle. Together, they began to experiment. They weren't just two thugs. They were students of the craft. They watched the world around them, and in the early 90 seconds, the world of Los Angeles was a bank robber's paradise. In 1991, the United States saw a staggering 9,388 bank robberies. A quarter of those 2,355 occurred in the Los Angeles metro area alone. By 1992, the frequency had increased to one robbery every 45 minutes of banking hours. It was an epidemic. But these were note jobs, quick, low stakes, and generally non-violent. With an average take of less than $2,000, the authorities and the banks fought back. They installed bullet-resistant acrylic, employed armed guards, utilized exploding die packs, and implemented randomized cash schedules. The government increased the mandatory minimum sentence for bank robbery to a crushing 25 years. These measures worked for the average criminal. By 1995, robberies had dropped by half. But for the high-incident bandits, as Larry and Emil would come to be known, the crackdown didn't stop them. It merely forced them to evolve. The stakes were now 25 years to life. If they were going to risk everything, they weren't going for $2,000. They were going for the vault. They decided that if the banks were going to use war tactics to protect their money, they would use military force to take it. Between 1990 and 1,992. They cut their teeth on small businesses and cash couriers, treating these crimes like research and development phases for a startup. And like any startup, they needed the right tools to scale. If you're looking to scale your own business the legal way, Odoo is the platform you need. Odoo's website builder is a game changer, allowing you to create a professional, mobile-friendly presence in minutes without touching a single line of code. With AI-driven copy generation, integrated SEO tools, and a suite of business apps ranging from CRM to accounting, Odoo grows as you do. Start your first app for free today and see why millions of legitimate businesses trust Odoo to handle their operations. Larry and Emil's first major success came in 1993. They ambushed an armored car and vanished with tens of thousands of dollars. It was a clean, surgical strike, but 3 months later, the universe threw them a curveball. A routine traffic stop for speeding turned into a catastrophe when Emil, sweating and nervous, told the officer the car belonged to Dennis's mom. Dennis was Larry's alias. The lie was flimsy. When the officer searched the vehicle, he didn't just find a discrepancy in the registration. He found an arsenal: 2 rifles, 2 handguns, 3,000 rounds of ammunition, smoke bombs, police scanners, and 2 sets of full-body armor. The pair were arrested and sentenced for conspiracy to commit robbery. They served their time, but the experience didn't rehabilitate them. It radicalized them. They realized their mistake wasn't the crime itself, it was being caught under-equipped. When they were released, they were convicted felons, legally barred from even touching a firearm. They responded by going underground and going big. In 1995, they graduated to murder, killing a security guard during an armored car heist. In 1996, they hit 2 Bank of America branches with such overwhelming firepower and speed that they were gone before the police could even set a perimeter. They were now flush with hundreds of thousands of dollars, but they wanted one last score, the one that would allow them to disappear forever. By early 1997, they had selected their target, the Bank of America on Laurel Canyon Boulevard in North Hollywood. It was the largest branch in the area, strategically located near a highway for a quick exit. To the west lay a shopping mall, a sea of civilians that would serve as a psychological deterrent for the police. To the east, a maze of residential streets offered multiple escape routes. They spent months preparing. They didn't just buy guns, they modified them. They acquired 3 Chinese-made Norinco-type .56 rifles, AK-47 variants, and converted them to fully automatic fire, fitting them with 100-round drum magazines. They added a Bushmaster XM15 and an HK-91 battle rifle for long-distance engagements. But their most terrifying preparation was their skin. They didn't just wear vests, they built suits of armor. Larry spent weeks sewing together Kevlar panels, reinforcing them with heavy steel trauma plates over his vital organs. He even fashioned homemade guards for his shins, thighs, and groin. When he was done, he was a 250-pound ironclad juggernaut. Compare this to the standard LAPD officer of the time. The men and women in blue were dressed in polyester uniforms and thin level 2 vests designed to stop small-caliber handguns. Their primary sidearm was the Beretta M92 FS, a 9mm pistol. To an officer looking at Larry Phillips, a 9mm round would look like a pebble thrown at a tank. The morning of February 28th was cold. Larry and Emil sat in their white Chevrolet Celebrity, the interior thick with the tension of 2 men about to cross the Rubicon. To steady their hands, they took phenobarbital, a sedative intended for seizures, but repurposed here to dull the spike of adrenaline. They had sewn watch faces into the backs of their gloves. The plan was 8 minutes, in and out. They expected $750,000. At 9:16 a.m., they stepped out of the car. Larry caught a glimpse of a patrol car cruising down Laurel Canyon, but he didn't flinch. He walked into the bank, grabbed a customer at the ATM, and fired a burst into the ceiling. The roar of the fully automatic fire was deafening in the confined space. Emil, meanwhile, moved like a ghost, shooting the lock off the teller door and forcing the manager toward the vault. But the perfect plan hit its first snag. The massive vault Larry had envisioned didn't exist. Instead, the bank utilized a series of individual lockboxes. Furthermore, the massive cash delivery they expected had been randomized. It wasn't there. They were working twice as hard for a fraction of the payout. Outside, the silence of the morning was already dead. The officers Larry had seen had called it in. 211 inches progress, Laurel Canyon, suspects in full tactical gear. 3 minutes in, Larry stepped outside to check the perimeter. He saw the blue uniforms taking positions across the street at the mall. He didn't retreat. He didn't take hostages. He raised his AK-47 and pulled the trigger. The sound was like a jackhammer, amplified 1,000 times. Larry wasn't firing aimed shots. He was suppressing the entire LAPD. The officers returned fire, their training taking over, but they watched in horror as their rounds struck Larry's chest and back, only for him to keep standing. He didn't even flinch. He was the Terminator come to life. Inside, Emil was frantically stuffing $303,305 into a duffel bag. He didn't notice the 3 small, plastic-wrapped packages tucked among the Bill's die packs. When he stepped out to join Larry, the air was a horizontal curtain of lead. The police had the area surrounded, but they were pinned behind their thin car doors, which Larry's armor-piercing rounds zipped through like paper. Then, the first surprise of the day occurred. The die packs in Emil's bag exploded, filling the bag with red smoke and searing heat. Simultaneously, a lucky shot from a distant officer grazed Emil's forehead. Blood poured into his eyes. In a panic, and believing the money was ruined, they abandoned the bag. The big score was now $0. It was now purely about survival. For the next 20 minutes, the world watched live on TV as Larry Phillips Jr. took on the LAPD single-handedly. He stood in the middle of the street, feet planted, trading fire with hundreds of officers. He was hit multiple times, including a shot to the side of his torso where the armor didn't meet. But the phenobarbital and the sheer rush of the fight kept him upright. When his AK-47 finally ran out of ammunition, he didn't surrender. He walked calmly to the car, pulled out the HK-91, and began firing at a news helicopter. The audacity was bone-chilling, but the luck of the high-incident bandits was finally running dry. A bullet struck the magazine of Larry's HK-91, jamming the weapon permanently. He threw it down and grabbed his backup AK-47. But this rifle was a lemon, an illegally modified weapon that jammed after every third shot. Larry was now a knight with a broken sword. The duo began a slow, agonizing retreat. Emil crawled along in the Chevy, the tires shredded by gunfire, while Larry walked beside it, using the vehicle as a rolling shield. But in the chaos of the residential streets, they became separated. A split second of poor communication, a turn taken too wide, and Larry was alone. He found himself pinned between a semi-truck and a wooden fence, facing a phalanx of officers. He was bleeding from a severed subclavian artery. His AK-47 jammed one last time, a round stovepiping in the chamber. He desperately tried to clear it, but his fingers were slick with blood. He dropped to his knees behind the truck, pulled his Beretta pistol, and fired one-handed at the officers. A return shot shattered his hand. Larry Phillips Jr. looked at the sky, placed the barrel of his own gun under his chin, and pulled the trigger. Simultaneously, a police bullet struck his spine. The man who wanted to be a titan fell in the dirt of a suburban driveway. But the nightmare wasn't over. Emil Mătăsăreanu was still mobile, driving a car that was more holes than metal. He tried to carjack a civilian, but the driver fled with the keys. Emil was trapped in a cul-de-sac when the LAPD SWAT team arrived. SWAT didn't play by the same rules as the patrol officers. They brought AR-15 seconds and a tactical mindset. As Emil took cover behind his car, a SWAT officer realized the flaw in the Juggernaut's armor: his legs. The officer dropped to the pavement, aiming beneath the cars, and began systematically shattering Emil's shins. Emil fell. He dropped his weapon and raised his hands, screaming for air. The Juggernaut was now just a man, bleeding out from 29 wounds in his lower body. Because of reports of a potential third gunman, the area remained a hot zone. Medics were barred from entering. Emil lay on the pavement for 56 minutes, the phenobarbital in his system thinning his blood, accelerating his end. He bled to death in the middle of the road, surrounded by the army he had tried to defy. When the smoke cleared, the numbers were staggering. 300 officers had responded. 12 officers and 8 civilians were wounded. Over 2,000 rounds had been fired. It was a miracle that only the 2 gunmen had died. The North Hollywood shootout was a tectonic shift for American law enforcement. The image of officers running to a nearby gun store Turner's Outdoorsman to buy rifles just to match the criminals' firepower was a humiliation the LAPD would never forget. The aftermath saw the rapid militarization of police departments across the country. The thin blue line was reinforced with AR-15 seconds, semi-automatic rifles, and armored rescue vehicles. The gap between the patrolman and the soldier began to close. Larry Phillips and Emil Mătăsăreanu didn't get their $750,000. They didn't get their clean getaway. Instead, they left behind a legacy of lead and a blueprint for a new, more dangerous era of American crime, and an even more heavily armed response. The quiet neighborhood of North Hollywood eventually returned to its routine, but the ghosts of the 8-minute heist still linger in every patrol car that now carries a rifle in the rack, ready for the day the monsters return.